Today starts a new series. I can't actually remember what the series is, but Amazing God, right? I know what my number one in the series is, which is amazed that Jesus would call me to follow him. And we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 5, and a very well-known Bible passage where Jesus calls Peter, and there's the amazing catch of fish and so on. Now, most kind of speakers or sermons starts with a kind of light introduction to kind of hook people in, and sometimes it's a joke. This is a true story. I'm going to start with. I was over in Hawick with the boys. So I'm glad there's a little bit of Hawick representation here. And we were they've got a new park in Hawick, and we went to see the park. As we were walking to the park, we spotted a couple of lads that work for the Hawick Parks Department. One of them was digging a hole. The other one followed behind, filling the hole in. Samuel Harris and I, we kind of watched this for a bit, and we were all amazed at this sight. So Samuel eventually went over and said, "Look, we're amazed. Why are you digging a hole?" And then the guy behind you is just filling it in. Well, the guy that was digging the hole wiped his brow and said, "Well, I suppose it looks a bit odd. You see, normally we're a 3-man team. But the lad who plants the trees is called in sick." It's amazing what you see in Hawick. True story. I guess when that word amaze can cover a kind of whole breadth of different things. Morag's often amazed if I put a kind of wash in. She's even more amazed if I take it out and hang it up. But amazed, it goes to the other end when we maybe have that, we're on the top of a mountain and we see the view, and sometimes the clouds just break and the sun beams down, and we're absolutely amazed at God's creation. And I guess it's that kind of amaze that I want us to kind of be thinking about as we go through this. I looked up the dictionary definition of amazed, and it says this: filled with the emotional impact of overwhelming surprise or shock. And that's the kind of amaze I want us to have in the back of our heads as we go through this. So we're going to read, it's Luke chapter 5, and the first little bit there. And as I said, it's a well-known passage. If you've been to Sunday school, it's probably been covered in Sunday school. So one day, as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. He noticed 2 empty boats at the water's edge, for the fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Stepping into one of the boats, Jesus asked Simon, or as we know, Peter, its owner, to push it out into the water. So he sat in the boat and taught the crowds from there. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Now go out where it is deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish." "Master," Simon replied, "we worked hard all last night and didn't catch a thing. But if you say so, I'll let the nets down again." And this time their nets were so full of fish they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. When Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "O Lord, please leave me. I'm too much of a sinner to be around you." For he was awestruck by the number of fish they had caught, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, and the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed. Jesus replied to Simon, Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people. And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. So, I suppose when we read that passage, and it certainly was picked up in Sunday school, the first thing that strikes you is this amazing catch of fish. And I wonder if we can sort of picture the scene, sort of cast our minds back 2,000 or more years ago, and what it must have been like, that kind of sense of occasion way back then with the crowds. They've come out of the local villages. They're interested. The passage says they're wanting to hear the word of God. They're kind of pressing in on Jesus. And kind of practical solution that Jesus comes up with is to borrow a boat out onto the water a little bit. And so his voice carries over the water and up onto the hillside with all these people there. It must have been quite something to have been part of that crowd and part of that occasion. But then even more so when, there's a bit of a murmur. What's going on now? What's Jesus doing now? And there's this catch of fish and there's boats sinking and there's excitement, and I could imagine people rushing forward down to the shore, wanting to be part of it. Maybe some of the fish are being given away and taken back home, and people talking about it and talking for days after about this amazing experience. And there's probably something about us as human beings that we kind of love to be part of an occasion like that. We love to be part of a crowd, to experience the excitement of something like that. For me, it's often a rugby crowd going to an international, maybe not yesterday, on the way home. Or round about these parts, it's the common riding, and although I'm not hugely into that, I like the crowd and going to see horses crossing the water or whatever it happens to be. And I guess it's easy for us to be part of the crowd. And I imagine we're a crowd here. That there's something about Jesus that kind of interests us. A bit of excitement. There's a bit of excitement around Hope Church, I suppose, at the moment, with Hope Central and plans and things like that. Exciting things on the horizon. Great thing about a crowd is that there's security in numbers. There's also anonymity. We can get lost in a crowd and just be part of the crowd, and no one kind of points the finger at us and says, "Hey, how about you?" Well, there's a real challenge in this passage that I hope we kind of get this evening is that Jesus does challenge us not as part of a crowd, but he challenges us as individuals. For Jesus, it's not good enough to be part of the crowd. And in this passage, when you look at it very quickly, things move from this scene of the crowd and the excitement and all the rest of it, and gets focused right in on Peter as an individual. The passage there called him Simon. And it's almost like the rest of it becomes a bit of a blur. And it's about Peter, and it's about Jesus. And I suppose just at the very start, what I want to say is that God has business to do with you tonight. Not somebody sitting next to you, not somebody in the back row, not somebody who's a wee bit keener than you, but you. And we should be a bit uncomfortable, because as God speaks to us and works in us, it is uncomfortable. So I want to kind of say three things about the passage, and two of them I think are really challenging, are really uncomfortable. And if we let God speak to us, they will be uncomfortable, and let's be prepared for that. But I think we need those two uncomfortable bits for the third bit, which is the encouragement, and hopefully that's where the amazement bit comes in. And I hope that as God speaks to us as individuals, that definition of amazed that we started with, that we will be filled with the emotional impact of overwhelming surprise that we would be amazed that Jesus would call me, you, to follow him. So the first thing then, Peter's response to Jesus. It's really interesting. In verse 8 of the passage we read, there's this amazing catch of fish. He's had to call over the other boats because there's so many fish. The boats are sinking. And Peter says, "Go away from me. I am a sinful man." The Message version of the Bible says, "Master, leave. I'm a sinner and can't handle this holiness. Leave me to myself." It's not what we might have expected. It brings to mind a story from the men's weekend. I know, guys, we agreed that we wouldn't tell any stories of the men's weekend. However, it concerns Davy, so I thought that was fair game. Friday night, Davy arrives, and he disappeared somewhere. And he went off. He had this telescopic fishing rod. The previous year at the men's weekend, Davy had spotted that there was a nearby lake, a pond, and Davy had obviously clocked, "I want to go and see if I can catch some fish." Well, I think we would have been amazed if Davy had actually come back with any fish. As it happened, he couldn't even get near the pond because of all the undergrowth, and we were watching him from the centre, and we could see him popping out of bushes every now and again, but he never got anywhere near the lake as it happened. But I don't know about Peter, that kind of huge catch of fish. You could imagine him saying, "Brilliant! Look at all these fish we've caught. That's it. I don't need to worry for the next number of weeks because we've got all these fish. We can sell them all. That's the bills paid. We've got enough profit to get that new boat that we've been hoping for." There's maybe practicalities going through his head. How will we get all these fish to market and so on? I'm watching a BBC series at the moment. It's based in Peterhead, and it's about fishermen that go out and on the boats and whatever. And they're all about the profit. They're all about, are we going to catch enough to pay the bills for the next trip kind of thing. But Peter's response is, "Leave me, I'm a sinner." And we need to have a wee think about what's going on there. If we backtrack a little bit before we come on, kind of answer that question, when I was doing some reading in preparation about this passage, there was a bit of discussion around when did Peter actually become a Christian? And lots of different people had lots of different ideas about that. It's not the first time Peter's met Jesus. In the previous chapter, Jesus went to Simon Peter's house and healed his mother-in-law. In John chapter 1, there's a story there, and I'll just read it. The next day, John was there again with two of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent that day with him. It was about 4 p.m. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon Peter and tell him, "We've found the Messiah." And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at Peter and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which when translated is Peter. And the kind of books that I read, there was this discussion going on about, well, when did Peter become a Christian? Was it kind of earlier on? Was it this passage? Was it maybe later on, not until Pentecost? Do you remember when, beginning of the book of Acts, Holy Spirit came? Was that when Peter became a Christian? And I kind of thought, actually, we could get a bit sidetracked here in a discussion about when did Peter become a Christian. And it's probably true, and probably true for most of us, that becoming a Christian actually is a bit more of a journey rather than a kind of necessarily a one-off event, but there's lots of things that contribute in that journey of becoming a Christian. And probably we might miss the point of what's actually going on in this story, because I think what happens here is a necessary part of becoming a Christian. At whatever point you are in that journey, and I imagine in a kind of gathering like this, we're all at different points in that Christian journey. Some of us would say we've been Christians for a number of years, lots and lots of years. Some of us probably, well, I'm not quite sure what it's all about, but I'm interested and I'm along that route. And I think Peter's experience here speaks to us wherever we are in that journey, because I think it's a necessary part of, yes, becoming a Christian in that journey, but also as experienced or older Christians, we need to come back to the kind of experience that Peter had. And I think what's going on here is this, that as Peter hauls out all of these fish, he begins to put in his head together all the bits that he knows about Jesus so far. And he has this sudden realization of who Jesus actually is. And it blows his mind. Right at that moment, he sees Jesus not as the carpenter's son, come inspirational speaker, but as a holy, living God. And it's Jesus the carpenter who says to Peter, the career fisherman, even that part of your life, your business life that you're so proud of, you're so competent in, that you've invested all your time in, I'm Lord of that also. And the only response that Peter has is to fall on his knees. He realizes how far away from God he is. He realizes just how utterly sinful he is, and there's nothing about him that's good enough in front of a holy God. And it seems at that moment, nothing else matters. The crowds, the excitement, the buzz for Peter, it's been silenced. The amazing catch of fish still flapping about in the boat. Boat's sinking, the urgency of his crew, the noise, nothing of that matters. It's just Jesus and Peter. And Peter realizes before that God, he's nothing. It's interesting in verse 5, when Jesus says to Peter, put your nets out, Peter says, Master. Here in verse 8, he now says, Lord. And Jesus says to Peter, right, now I can use you. Follow me. If we go all the way back to the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, there's a very similar pattern in chapter 6 in Isaiah, that there's this vision of who God is for Isaiah, and Isaiah's response, and then God coming and saying, right, now I can use you. This is what it says. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying, and they were calling to one another, Holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Now, I don't know exactly what was going on there, but it was a vision of God, and it absolutely blew Isaiah's mind, and he said, Woe to me! I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips. I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. So there's the brokenness of Isaiah. But then God saying, right, now I can use you. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin is atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" Isaiah said, "Here am I, send me." Now, what I said earlier was that God's got business for you, personal dealings with you. And I wonder, when was the last time, if ever, were we utterly floored by a realization of a holy God? Sometimes you hear of people that maybe in a quiet time with God, they're reading the Bible or maybe out for a walk or whatever, and they're praying, and they have an experience of God that literally floors them, and they're flat on their face because they have that realization of just who God is and just who we are, that we bring nothing to that. What about now? For some of us, maybe for the first time, is it that time to let everything else fall into the background? Who you're sitting next to, the lights, what's for tea, who's broken a glass over in the corner, what's coming up in the following weeks, to let all of that fall behind and focus on who you are before a holy God. I wonder where we stand. I wonder if we come with bits of us that we're still kind of proud of. Well, I'm not a bad person. I read my Bible. Well, at least I've read it a couple of times this week. I've spoken to somebody about God today. I've volunteered at Hope Central. I'm pretty proud of my career, my family, my business. I've done all right, God. You see, it's really, really easy for bits of us to come into that kind of deal with God and saying, there's bits of me, I'm okay. And God says, no, none of it. None of it is good enough. And I think we need to reach that point again and again in our lives as Christians where we stand before a holy God. We're utterly aware of just how sinful we are, that we bring nothing, and that we're broken before a holy God. And it's then that God says, right, now I can use you. Follow me. Second thing, where I hope we're still feeling a bit uncomfortable and challenged. So Peter says to Jesus, "Go away from me, I am sinful." Jesus responds, he says, "Yeah, actually, Peter, now you mention it, you are absolutely right. I'm a way to find somebody else that's a bit more worthy, someone who's got a bit more going for them, somebody maybe who's a bit kind of more educated than you, somebody that's not going to let me down in the future, like I know you're going to do." Not a bit of it. Jesus says, don't be afraid. I'm giving you a job. You're going to be a fisher of men. I'm giving you the most important job in the whole world. And so Peter's response, he leaves everything, follows Jesus. So he leaves the family business. It's probably been handed down from generation to generation. It's all that Peter knew. It's not like kind of modern times these days where we might have several different careers. If you were a fisherman in those days, that's what you did all your life. He leaves all of that. And there's a really simple test of where we're at with our faith. It's not necessarily that we have to give up everything, kind of follow Jesus right away and walk out the door and leave our everything. But the test is, if that is what Jesus asks of you tonight, would you be willing to give up everything? If Jesus said to you tonight, I want you to stop what you're currently doing. I want you to leave the security of your job or your business or whatever it is you've been building up over the last number of years and follow me. Come and leave all of that and work full time for me. I wonder if we'd be willing. I find that really, really challenging when I think about my family life, my career that I've built up over years and years and years, the house, the mortgage, if Jesus was to say, right, leave all that, follow me into this other sphere of service, would I be willing? Would I say yes? I remember quite a number of years ago visiting Pakistan when I worked for Scripture Union and meeting a missionary, and she still sticks in my head, somebody called Marion Morrison, who was a doctor. In this country, she would have been very, very highly paid because she was a very, very skilled person. And she worked in a women's hospital in Pakistan, in a kind of fairly rural part of Pakistan. And where she was, she pretty much lived in a compound. It wasn't necessarily safe for her to be out and about. She'd given up everything to follow, because Jesus had said, follow me, and had gone there. So her security, money, position, marriage, there were no kind of single Christian guys knocking about in that part of Pakistan. Her freedom, she'd given it up because Jesus had said, follow me. And I don't know, maybe I've kind of got rose-tinted spectacles on. It seemed when I was growing up that in church things and so on, you would hear fairly regularly of people that were kind of leaving their job or whatever and going and kind of working full-time in Christian service. And I don't know if we hear so much of that these days. Maybe I'm just kind of not in whatever loop that is. I don't know. What are your thoughts? That should be a mark of a growing church. Seems to be the mark of a New Testament church. And there's a kind of challenge here for us as individuals, maybe for us as a church, is who from Hope Church has been called into that kind of service that God said, I want you to follow me in that particular way. Who is it that we've had out the front saying, right, we're supporting you and your family in this kind of big move? I don't know. Surely not that there's no need anymore. It's surely not that there's no need in this land, in other lands where God needs full-time Christian workers. It was interesting, Danny just speaking about plans for growing a ministry team. Is it that we've become too comfortable? Personally, have I become too comfortable in my life? I remember being at uni and being really, I think full-time Christian work is for me. And after university, I worked with a church for a year or two and then worked for Scripture Union for a year or two. Well, what if God was to ask me, I want you now to go back to that kind of thing? Would I be willing? Like I said at the beginning, I want this to be about you and God, not the person next to you. Don't be kind of sitting thinking, I think two along in the row, that must be you. This is about you. If God was to say to you, would you be willing, like Peter? What are some of the excuses that Peter could come up with about family? I've got family and so on, and they're all settled, and there's wider family commitments. Well, Peter was presumably married. He had a mother-in-law. His mother-in-law's just been healed. Has he not got a kind of responsibility to mother-in-law? What about money? Well, Peter's just had the most successful moment in his business career so far with all these fish, and he's left it all. What about that kind of excuse of, well, I'm not that educated, maybe somebody else that's more educated than me? Well, Peter as a fisherman wasn't educated. What about age being an issue? Well, reading or hearing from somebody quite powerfully speaking that Peter was probably a teenager. He probably wasn't an older man, but yet he left everything and followed him. What about, I'm not spiritual enough? That kind of stuff's for the kind of more spiritual of us to kind of do that kind of thing. Well, and we'll come on to this. Peter wasn't the most spiritual kind of person. Not that long after spending all that time with Jesus, he denied that he even knew Jesus 3 times for somebody that was supposed to be kind of spiritual. I wonder if there's a challenge here for somebody kind of specifically tonight. Is God speaking to you about service? And he's saying to you tonight, follow me in that particular way. We're going to be singing a bit later on. But I know we are because I asked if we could sing it. The song that's got I think it's called Oceans. And it's got the kind of lines in it. It says, Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters, wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander. And I wonder later when we sing it, do we mean it? Do we really mean it? Would we be willing to give up everything and follow him? And just like before, it's really about who is your God? Who is our God? What is your vision of God? Is he ruler? Is he creator? Is he Lord of everything? Because if he is, and we trust him, if he said, follow me, we would. I want to read something that popped up on Facebook, of all places. And it's really relevant. It popped up just in the last couple of weeks, and it's really, really challenging. It's about the story of Graham Staines and his family, and some of you may remember this. It was about 20 years ago to the day, a couple of weeks ago. He was an Australian Christian missionary working in India, in Orissa. And the story was that during the night, Graham, his 2 sons, were burned to death in their car by Hindu fundamentalists. And it's a blog post that I want to read you, that somebody, a contemporary of one of the boys that was killed, that wrote with kind of input from Graham Staines' wife and daughter. This piece is written to mark the 20th anniversary of the death of Graham, Philip, and Timothy Staines, who lived and died in the state of Orissa in northeast India. And then a quote from John 12. Truly I say to you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Dear Philip. So Philip, she's imagining she's writing to Philip, one of the sons who was tragically killed. It's strange to think that 20 years has passed since that January night. Strange as well to think that it had never happened. If it had never happened, you would now be 30. Timothy, 26 years old. We woke up the day after your death to another day at Kovalam Beach where we were on holiday. And there it was on the front page of the Hindu newspaper. A grainy photo of a burnt-out vehicle and words that blurred on the page, disconnected and nonsensical. The morning after your death was separate to normal reality, brazen, burnt into the memory and never forgotten. And that morning at Kovalam Beach, the waves still crashed on the beach. The lassie was still sweet. Lime sodas were still for sale. The fishermen still dragged their boats up on the beach like any other day. Back at school, a few weeks later, your memorial service was held outside on the basketball court. The sky incongruously blue and the sun bright. We sang, "It is well with my soul." Interesting that we sang that just before I started speaking. We remembered you writing with too much premonition for a 10-year-old that you wanted to live to give God glory in your school handbook. 2 other Standard 13 students and I read an account of the life of Horatio Spafford, the writer of the hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul." Horatio's family was almost entirely swept away, with only the exception of a baby daughter. My preoccupied mind did not really join the dots in what I was reading and how it related to recent events. Horatio's overwhelming loss was, and is, the loss experienced by your mum and your sister Esther. Your family's loss was, and is, our loss to share. Horatio's reaction was, and is, your mum's and Esther's reaction, and could be ours. But I confess at the time, this significance was lost on me. All I felt was empty shock. So much has happened in 20 years. We're all grown up now, and you would be too if none of it had happened. Esther and your mum are back in Australia. Esther is married with 4 children, with a son, your nephew, who looks exactly as you did. I visited Hebron in 2009 and found that the newly renovated hall was named the Staines Memorial Hall. The plaque outside reads, "Truly I say to you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." Orissa is a place of a rapidly growing church. Those many seeds are green shoots, and Orissa is still a place of the intensely persecuted. The air still hangs heavy with the suffering of Christians where you lived and eventually died. Thousands are displaced, Christians killed, church buildings destroyed. The world is not worthy of them. The world was not worthy of you or Timothy or your dad either. And although the adult Philip or Timothy or the 78-year-old missionary statesman Graham are not a real presence for us this earth side, it is gloriously real heaven side. It is well with our souls, and it will be well with our souls. I find that tremendously challenging, and it just so happens that popped up as I was preparing, and it's not that I think we should immediately be uplifting and moving our families away to kind of dangerous places or anything like that, but it's that God says, "Follow me." Would we be prepared to follow him? Philippians 2, there's a series of verses there that I think kind of combines these two really challenging kind of thoughts from this passage. Before God, we are utterly sinful. We don't bring anything to God, but God did something about that. God says, "Give up everything and follow me." And this passage says, well, Jesus gave up everything for you. Here's what it says. Jesus, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, Jesus made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant. Being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. We are completely and utterly sinful before God. There's nothing that we bring to God, but God did something about it. God says to us, "Follow me, give up everything and follow me." Jesus did that first for us. So the last bit, the third bit, and hopefully this is where the amazed bit comes in. Jesus says to Peter, "Follow me." The title of what I was to speak about was Amazed that Jesus would call me to follow him. And here's the amazing thing, that Jesus knows exactly what Peter's like, but yet Jesus still says to Peter, follow me. I reckon Peter's kind of the disciple that most Christians kind of, it's their favorite. If you're like, who's your favorite disciple? It's Peter. Because he's awful. And we can so much identify in Peter. In this passage, look how he responds to Jesus. He's seen Jesus heal his mother-in-law. He's probably seen other kind of miracles about. And Jesus said to him, put your nets out for some more fish. And Peter's response is grudging, shaky kind of faith. It's like, Peter's like, really? It's the middle of the day, fish don't come out in the day, and you're asking me to put my nets out again. All right, okay, if you say. That's the kind of faith that Jesus had. There's the incident where Jesus sends the disciples off in a boat to the other side of the lake. Jesus has got some business to do. I don't know what he was doing. But then comes out walking on the lake to the disciples. And Peter sees Jesus, jumps out of the boat, as you do, and starts walking on the water to Jesus. And what does Peter do? He looks around and he's like, oh my goodness. And he starts sinking because he's taken his eyes off Jesus. As we mentioned already, Peter has spent 3 years in the presence of Jesus, seeing everything that Jesus does. And when this little lassie round the fire, when Jesus is arrested, says to him, did you know Jesus? You were with him, weren't you? 3 times, Peter says, I don't know what you're talking about. That's the kind of man Peter was. Jesus knows all about Peter, but yet still says to him, follow me, and I will make you fisher of men. A little bit later in the Bible, there's this discussion among the disciples about who Jesus is. And Jesus turns to Peter and says, who do you say I am? And Peter answers, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. So Jesus replies to him, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You didn't learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And then there's that incident where on the shore again, and I think fish are involved as well, and there's a bit of a fire and a barbecue going on, and Peter is mindful, I'm sure, of 3 times he denied Jesus. So Jesus comes quietly just to Peter, says, do you love me? Feed my sheep. 3 times, reinstating Peter back into relationship with him. This whole story of the miracle of the fish seems set up just for Peter. It just so happens that Jesus comes to the shore where Peter just so happens to be mending his nets, and Jesus just so happens to choose out of the boats that were probably lying there, just so happens to choose Peter's. And the miracle that was performed is exactly the miracle that's going to appeal to Peter the fisherman. And so Peter follows. And God uses Peter, his shaky kind of faith, all throughout the New Testament. Jesus leading Peter back onto the right path. See, Peter's effectiveness isn't dependent on Peter. It's not dependent on some kind of faith that Peter has to stir up in himself. It's dependent on Jesus' hold on Peter and Jesus' plan for Peter. And then we have that amazing story at Pentecost, the beginning of Acts. It's Peter's first sermon. I don't know if he was as nervous as I was. 3,000 conversions on his first sermon. That's how God used Peter. And I think there's real encouragement here because, well, I don't know about you, but my faith's like Peter's. It goes up and down and it wavers and yeah, I do believe it, then I've got doubts and I don't believe and keep things back from God, and we say, yeah, you can have that bit of my life, but not that bit. And I wonder if we can spot all through our lives, wherever we are in terms of our Christian journey, just at the beginning, just not even at the beginning, or maybe further down, the times that Jesus gently pulls us back on track. Just so ordered things so that we hear about him, that we're brought back to him. We're reminded of just how much he loves us and just how much he's done for us. The truth is, we don't bring anything to Jesus. The truth is that he demands everything. It's not in the Bible, but tradition has it that Peter was eventually crucified for being a Christian. But Jesus calls us, continues to call us. It's Jesus that leads us deeper and deeper into the relationship with him. Never, ever abandons us. Even though we're so sinful and wayward and all the rest of it. He knows all about that. Doesn't give up on us, changes us, uses us. I wonder if we're amazed that Jesus would call us to follow him. Remember that definition that we started with, and we're finishing with it now, that we're filled with the emotional impact of overwhelming surprise or shock. Started with, Jesus is here to do business with you. Not somebody next to you, but with you. And I wonder where we stand with all of that. We're going to come and sing as the band comes up. A couple of songs, again, I know what they're going to sing because I asked them if we could sing them. The first one picks up on our vision of God, about the holiness of God and just who God is. And then the one that I mentioned we're going to sing about our willingness to give up everything and follow if that's what God asks of us.